Welcome to State of Crisis Scandal in Virginia. I'm Ed O'Keefe, CBS News in Richmond tonight from Capitol Square in the capital city of the Commonwealth of Virginia. This is a state that remains in limbo tonight politically, as there are still questions about its governor, its lieutenant governor, and attorney general. Most of today, though, dominated by an interview that Governor Ralph Northam conducted with our own Gayle King, in which he said he will not be resigning.
We have worked very hard. Right now, Virginia needs someone that can heal. Virginia also needs someone who is strong, who has empathy, who has courage, and who has a moral compass. And that's why I'm not going anywhere.
Now, Northam isn't the only Democrat, of course, under scrutiny here in Virginia. The lieutenant governor still, of course, faces questions. He showed up for work today at the Capitol, still under the threat of impeachment. Here's the latest. In Richmond today, members of the African-American community said they stand by the governor despite the revelation that he had a racist photo on his medical school yearbook page.
We have evaluated the governor's past performance, and we have known him and choose to forgive.
But in that interview with Gayle King, Northam raised further questions about his understanding of racial issues when he referred to slaves as indentured servants.
Just 90 miles from here, in 1619, the first indentured servants from Africa landed on our shores in Old Point Comfort, what we call now Fort Monroe. And while
also known as slavery.
Yes.
Yeah.
In a statement released today, Northam said, "A historian advised me that the use of indentured was more historically accurate than enslaved." He added, "The fact is, I'm still learning and committed to getting it right."
Anything to say to your accusers, sir?
Meanwhile, Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax showed up for work as he faces allegations of sexual assault.
We've called for an independent investigation, and I am still very confident in the truth.
For now, he appears to have held off an impeachment push as Virginia Democratic Delegate Patrick Hope delayed his introduction of articles of impeachment.
We haven't figured out that that's the appropriate vehicle to do it.
In an interview with the Washington Post, Fairfax again denied allegations by two women of sexual assault and rape. "I am still standing up for everyone's right to be heard," he said, "but I'm also standing up for due process." On Face the Nation yesterday, Virginia Democratic Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton said it was too late for that.
And this is not an issue where we need to prove something to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Elected leaders need to be held to a higher standard.
We also learned today that Lieutenant Governor Fairfax has parted ways with at least 4 of his staffers who work for him on the government payroll and that of his political action committee. A few do remain, so while he intends to stay in office, at least his inner circle is shrinking. And at the opening of proceedings today was notable. Fairfax and fellow senators bowed their heads as the minister prayed in part that God, quote, bring reconciliation, bring healing, and bring a peace to this place. The governor certainly seems to try to be moving on, and the interview that he conducted with our Gayle King yesterday, he outlined what exactly was going through his mind on that day 10 days ago, that Friday 10 days ago, when it was revealed that there was a photo on his medical school yearbook page that is seen by many, seen by most, as racist. And the thought that went through his head into the next day when he held that dramatic news conference at the governor's mansion and seemed to take back his apology, saying that it wasn't him. It was those statements that set off the crisis that now embroils not only the governor, but his lieutenant governor and attorney general. He sat down on Sunday with Gayle King at the governor's mansion just up the hill. Here's part of their interview.
I marvel that you're still standing when so many people have said, you got to go and you got to go now. I'm thinking either he's got a lot of confidence or he's just a little crazy.
Well, I know in my heart who I am, and I know what I can do. And Virginia right now needs a leader that's strong, that has courage, and that can take us to the next level, and I can do that.
You might have to convince people that you're still the right leader for this job. You have a lot to do.
I have a lot of work to do, but I will do everything that I can to regain Virginia's trust.
Starting with a press conference 9 days ago, he says, to set the record straight, denying the man in that racist photo was him.
I believe then and now that I am not either of the people in that photo.
So take us in the process of, you realize, uh-oh, Houston, we have a problem, that's not me. Take us behind the scenes of discussions that you and your staff and your wife had about now we're going to go in front of the cameras and say, it isn't me.
Saturday was a very busy day. I did talk to my wife, my close colleagues, and I just made the decision that we need to clarify this.
But was there some concern with people saying, Governor, now you're going to really look crazy?
Well, I've always been a transparent person, and I just thought it was important to let people know that wasn't me. That's not who I was at that time, and it's certainly not who I am now after 35 years of service to this country and my Commonwealth.
So after Saturday, the drumbeat started beating immediately about he needs to go by people in your own party, by some of the top Democratic leaders in the country, by some of your constituents who were protesting outside your home. And after that happened, you thought what?
I thought, first of all, I've heard a lot of people, not only in Virginia, but in this country. But I also know that I was elected to be the governor of Virginia. People had faith and confidence in me, and we've had a great first year. We've expanded health care to over 400,000. We've dealt with criminal justice reform. We've raised the felony larceny threshold.
Your history of work is good. Your history of work is good. But I do want to make sure that we focus on this, because I think that this is really important to clarify your position.
Yes.
And why you think you still deserve this job when so many people are calling for you to step down.
Well, again, we have worked very hard. Right now, Virginia needs someone that can heal. Virginia also needs someone who is strong, who has empathy, who has courage, and who has a moral compass. And that's why I'm not going anywhere.
You know, the other thing that struck people in the news conference is when you were talking about Michael Jackson, and you said, you know, because many people know it's hard to remove shoe polish from your face. And I'm thinking, A, how do you know that?
Yeah.
Because it implies that you certainly put shoe polish on your face on more than one occasion. How do you know that it's difficult to remove?
Well,
I didn't know that.
When I dressed up as Michael Jackson, I put some shoe polish on my cheeks on both sides. You also, or not you, but folks need to know that I went to military school, military college for 4 years. I polish my shoes almost every day. We did that with what we call a spit shine rag. It's a very thin piece of cloth, and the shoe polish.
To do that, yeah.
Yes, and the shoe polish goes through that cloth, and it gets on your finger or my finger, and it's very difficult to remove. So that's why I know shoe polish is difficult.
So that's what you were referring to.
That's correct.
Okay. From the very beginning, you said you were not stepping down, but the story has certainly changed. Are there any circumstances that you would step down?
Well, I'm prepared right now to move forward. I don't have any plans to resign, and I think we have a unique opportunity to make impactful changes.
Wouldn't you have preferred to have this unique opportunity another way?
I would, but again, I really do believe that things happen for a reason.
I do too.
I am a faithful person, and there is a reason, I believe, that this happened.
And happened to you.
It did.
And what do you think that reason is?
That we are in a position to learn. I will focus on race and equity. That's something that for the next 3 years is going to be my commitment to Virginia, and I really think we can make impactful changes.
Now, Virginia is divided over whether or not Northam should stay. In fact, evenly divided, if you believe a poll that was published over the weekend by the Washington Post, taken before Northam's interview with CBS News. It finds that 47% of Virginians say he should resign, and 47% say he should not. Notably, 58% of African Americans in Virginia say he should not resign. He should stay in office. We've been in Virginia since the story broke. We've been talking to regular everyday Virginians just as much as we talk to lawmakers here at the Capitol. Here is some of what residents of the Commonwealth have been telling us.
This is not a man who hates black people. I'm black. I am offended by the blackface. I am offended by the hood. That's not him.
We need to ask ourselves how much value there is in dredging up these wounds of the past.
His actions in his past, and to continue to stand for it as our governor is not welcomed. We cannot stand for that.
I think there are some mistakes in life that are just disqualifiers, and this is one of them.
I think he should resign because he took the picture, he admitted it, And once you admit something, you can't take it back. You already said that it was you.
This is much larger than just one picture of blackface or a Klan hood. It's absolutely despicable that this is where our governor has gone to in his past.
Resign today. Give us at least that.
Back here live at Capitol Square in Richmond, I'm joined by two political correspondents who have been covering this scandal alongside us. We've relied on some of their reporting and certainly their perspective. On screen right, Jeff Shapiro is the politics columnist for the Richmond Times-Dispatch and has been covering politics in the Commonwealth for almost 40 years. And Jake Burns is a reporter for our Richmond affiliate WTVR CBS 6. We could not tell this story without the assistance of CBS 6, so we're thrilled, Jake, that you're here. Guys, we've seen yet another turn today. We anticipated that Monday would begin with an introduction of articles of impeachment by a delegate from Northern Virginia who saw the news Friday about a second accuser against a lieutenant governor, and then today seemed to come to Richmond and realize, oh, wait a second, I'm a legislator. I don't get to do this by myself. We have to hold meetings and, you know, other planning sessions before we figure out exactly whether or not we can try to impeach the lieutenant governor. I'm just curious what you guys make, Jeff, we could start with you, of this latest turn. And if this essentially buys the lieutenant governor some more time.
Delegate Hope didn't have support within his own Democratic caucus, and there was clearly considerable concern among Republicans as well. This has never been done before. If one reads the papers, it appears the last time that the General Assembly sat to impeach an elected official, actually it was elected by the General Assembly, it would have been a judge. So this is terra incognita. But it is also a reminder that this story is moving very quickly, and often many of the steps that are being taken are not necessarily fully informed steps.
Right. And Jake, I mean, part of what was fascinating is we spent most of last week running into lawmakers who agreed that all three of these guys, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, either had to go or were on watch. But then that poll came out over the weekend from the Washington Post suggesting that the Commonwealth is actually somewhat evenly split, and African Americans think the governor deserves a second shot. I'm curious, did you today sense the same level of, oh, maybe we got this wrong, that we did among some of these legislators?
Well, there definitely was that rush right off the bat to call for Governor Northam and also eventually Lieutenant Governor Fairfax to step aside. Then you see this poll come out, and I think what you mentioned with the people you spoke with here in Virginia is an important point as well. We've been speaking with folks on the street now for several days, and they tell us much of the same thing, which is about half the people think he needs to step down, Governor Northam that is. The other half say that he should be forgiven and should be given the opportunity to clear his name and maybe do some good for this Commonwealth. So I think those numbers are very interesting to see, putting data to what we have heard from people out on the streets since this scandal broke a couple Fridays ago.
And there's a generational element here as well, talking, for example, with younger African Americans who perhaps feel more strongly about the need for change at the highest levels of the government versus older African Americans who are prepared to give Northam another chance. To your point about the poll, nearly 60% of African Americans may be supporting Northam, but he was elected with about 90% of the African American vote.
And we talked about this last week, Jeff, the fact that the state, former seat of the Confederacy, definitely part of the Deep South and Ruby Red Republican for quite some time, has spent much of the past 10 years really evolving politically and demographically. And I think there's a sense among people who are maybe track politics at a national level outside of Virginia in recent years that this is a Democratic state. But as you reminded me last week, and as I think that poll reflects, there's an understanding here that there's a pretty complex history, and that what we've seen just in the last 10 years is quite dramatic compared to most of Virginia's history.
Yeah, this is not your father's or your grandfather's Virginia. As I think we discussed last week, the majority of people who live here are from somewhere else. This is truly a multi-hued Virginia. When I landed here in 1979, one was either African American, Caucasian, with a smattering of Native Americans. Now we have 30% of the population minority, and that includes Asians and Latinos, each roughly 6 to 8% of the population. Their presence was negligible 40 years ago.
We have elections in this state later this year. That's part of what makes this so tricky. We have elections every year in this state, right?
Every year in Virginia.
That is part of what is making this so difficult for Democrats. Remind us of how tight the balance of power is in these two chambers and what it is Democrats are hoping to do later this year.
Heading into this year, it was a 2-seat margin in both chambers, in the Senate and in the House of Delegates. And Democrats were really hoping after 2017, that election that many called a blue wave here in Virginia, where they really closed the margin, especially in the House, that they had an opportunity to take over both chambers and also have a Democratic governor sitting in the executive mansion. That would have been a game changer for Democrats in the state, as Jeff knows so well, and many people who follow this in Virginia as well. They were thinking this election in 2019 was going to be huge for the Democratic Party here in Virginia and could be a game changer for everyone here at the Capitol. What remains to be seen at this point is come November what this scandal, first of all, what's going to happen with it, and secondly, what voters will think about it when they finally head to the polls.
Yeah, and the added complexity is these are legislative elections. They are hyper-local. They tend to be friends and neighbors affairs with very, very low turnouts. Even in the bluest areas of the state, the Democrats need to get out every vote and then some.
I'm just curious as we wrap up, this is a state that's had scandal before. Most recently it was Bob McDonnell, the former governor, but that was mostly over an overpriced refrigerator, not anything on the scale of what we've seen in the last few days. What do your colleagues in Virginia press, your friends and neighbors here in town make of the national attention that this has drawn, and the fact that it wasn't 1, 2, but 3 of these at the same time?
You know, I spoke with someone on the street the other day that said they were getting calls from their friends across the country saying what is going on in Virginia and who is going to be leading your state as we move forward. I think that speaks just to what how big this has gotten. And, you know, the McDonnell controversy and his trial was definitely a big national headline, but it's nothing like what we see here, where everyone in the country is looking at every single twist and turn that happens with this scandal. And it's interesting to see how Virginians react. Obviously, it's very dependent on the person and the voter and the lawmaker that we're speaking with, but just in general, it's inescapable here at Capitol Square and really anywhere here in Richmond.
And this accelerant of nonstop news and social media, and to the point of social media, someone who's far more clever than I could possibly be observed on Twitter, that things are so bad in Virginia that now West Virginia would like to be known as East Kentucky.
We'll leave it at that. Jeff Shapiro with the Richmond Times-Dispatch, Jake Burns with WTVR CBS 6 here in Richmond. Thank you both for joining us. We appreciate it. We'll be back in a moment more on the accusations against Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax as national Democrats demand his resignation and some members of his own staff quit. You're streaming State of Crisis, Scandal in Virginia on CBSN. Welcome back to Richmond. I'm Ed O'Keefe of CBS News. We've been here for about 10 days covering a scandal unlike anything we've seen in this state or really across the country, a trio of state executives who face questions about their past, whether it's issues of racial insensitivity, sexual assault, or rape. In all 3 cases, the men faced the music here in Richmond, but are managing, at least so far, to hold on. Perhaps the most intriguing character in all this is the 39-year-old Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, who many in the Democratic Party saw not only as a future governor of Virginia, but potentially somebody who could hold even higher national office one day. About a week ago, many here would have thought that he was on the verge of becoming governor as Ralph Northam was facing calls to resign. But then there were questions about his past. And over the weekend, 2 accusers said they would be willing to testify in public hearings about possible articles of impeachment. But Fairfax appears to have fended off an impeachment push, at least for now. And yet he's still facing national pressure to step down over those claims of sexual assault that he denies. Elaine Quijano discussed the Fairfax situation earlier today with her guests on Red and Blue.
Let's bring in Eugene Scott, Joel Payne, and Caitlin Huey-Burns. Eugene is a political reporter for The Washington Post. Joel is a Democratic strategist and former senior aide for Hillary for America. And Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter. Welcome to you both. So Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax has said he will not resign and has called for investigations into 2 allegations of sexual assault brought against him. A number of national lawmakers have called on him to resign. Do you think, Caitlin, that he's starting to feel the pressure
He's not. In fact, he seems pretty dug in on his position at this point, which is denial of both accounts, which many who are calling for him to resign have deemed credible. And to your point about the Democratic Party establishing this moral high ground, or seeking to claim the moral high ground, when they ousted Al Franken ahead of that Alabama special election, their stance on Kavanaugh, their stance on others, John Conyers, was also part of this. They have a zero tolerance policy, and they're kind of facing that head on here with political consequences. Those consequences being that if they were to oust all of these folks, the Republicans could come into power. So they're kind of at this moment. But you're seeing the 2020 candidates, the Democrats running for the party's nomination for president, all kind of in unison, calling on Fairfax to resign. They already called for Northam to resign. So this is really a sticking point for the party, but they're also starting to feel kind of what these consequences actually are.
Could this, Eugene, potentially be the start of a recalibration of that zero tolerance policy that we'd seen on the Democratic side?
You know, I don't know that it actually is, in part because most Democrats have called on these individuals to resign. So it appears that the majority of Democrats, at least in positions of power, don't want this policy, the zero tolerance policy, to change. I think what you're seeing on the ground when you're looking at voters are people being a bit more pragmatic and practical and seeming to understand that there's a big difference between doing something 30 years ago, admitting it, and making a vow to change, which is what the Democratic Attorney General and the governor have done, compared to perhaps some of the situations we've seen with Republicans like Steve King and Donald Trump. And asking someone to leave office if they are suggesting a repeated behavior that is problematic. I think certainly that we're going to see some Democrats in office, stay in positions despite facing some real controversies and arguing that that's the best thing for the party as a whole.
Elaine, what's unique about this too is the Virginia rules around governorship, right? They're one-term governors, so there really isn't a re-election that Governor Northam has to contend with and have to worry about going in front of the electorate again. This is his political destiny essentially here in his hands. He doesn't have to face voters again, and I think that makes this a really unique situation, whereas maybe in another state you'd be worried about, hey, in 2021 I got to go back in front of voters. Also, just thinking about the 2020 race, I think Jamel Bowie on Face the Nation yesterday, I think he said something about how this was the woke primary. Who was the most woke out of anybody? And I think that's bled over into how we, how we govern ourselves in everyday behavior as well, particularly for Democrats. Democrats have decided to traffic in this, and I don't say that critically. I'm just saying that's where we've decided the standard is. So if the standard's there, that they're not going to move off of that, because it's important to where they are, where their voters are, and where the future of the party is.
I imagine there are really some very heated discussions, though, taking place behind the scenes on the Democratic side. All right, Eugene Scott, Joel Payne, and Caitlin Huey-Burns, thanks to you all.
Coming up, Gayle King asks Governor Northam what he's learned since the scandal broke. Live from Richmond, this is State of Crisis, Scandal in Virginia. Wherever, however you're doing it. Thank you for streaming CBSN. Welcome back to State of Crisis, Scandal in Virginia. I'm Ed O'Keefe of CBS News here in Capitol Square in Richmond. We should take a moment to thank the Capitol Police, the other state agencies that have been quite accommodating to all of us as we've been here for the last 10 days since this scandal broke. It was late on a Friday night that Governor Ralph Northam admitted that it was him in a racist photo on a yearbook page of his medical school yearbook. And the next morning, he started calling around saying, nope, actually it wasn't me. And then in an awkward press conference decided to explain why it wasn't. And ever since that press conference, he's been under scrutiny by fellow Democrats and Republicans calling on him to step down. The story broke in a way that many scandals break these days, on a partisan website with a guy named Patrick Howley, who is the founder and editor-in-chief of the conservative-leaning website Big League Politics. My colleague Tanya Rivero spoke with him last week and started by asking him how he found the story.
A concerned citizen who had known about this for years brought this to my attention because this person wanted to expose Ralph Northam's history of racism and his racist past. And I'm happy to be a conduit of this information, and I'm glad that it got out there to the American people so that people could see what Ralph Northam was doing at this point in his life.
And is it true that the person who first, brought this photo to your attention was motivated by the governor's remarks on late-term abortions?
Well, this person was a private citizen, and I'm not going to get into who this person was or why they did it. However, this was not a cynical political operation. This person was a citizen who just wanted to do the right thing.
And did you reach out to Northam's office before publishing, and did anyone get back to you?
No, no one got back to me. And so I confirmed the authenticity of the photo, ran the story, and exposed his racist past.
So, Patrick, you used to work for Breitbart, and your current website is pro-Trump. What would you say to those who would say that that bias taints any reporting that your outlet puts out?
I would say look at what this story is accomplishing, Tanya, because there are progressives, there are conservatives, there are libertarians all over this country who are uniting right now in their hatred of Ralph Northam, perhaps for different reasons. But we are starting to see that the 2D news narrative that exists in the media in America is starting to break down, and people are coming together, and they choose not to be divided. And I think that is something that, people are learning. People are learning that their Republican neighbors hate racism too. People are learning that their Democrat neighbors hate racism, and people are coming together in this country, and that's a very important thing.
Well, that's one way to put it. Patrick Howley of Big League Politics there speaking with our Tanya Rivero last week. Back here live in Richmond. As the crisis intensifies, Governor Northam told CBS This Morning's Gayle King he overreacted in his initial response to the revelations about his yearbook. Here's more of their conversation.
What have you learned that you didn't know before?
Well, several things, starting with I was born in white privilege, and that has implications to it, and it is much different the way a white person such as myself is treated in this country.
Did you not know that you were born into white privilege?
I knew I was, Ms. King, but I didn't realize really the powerful implications of that. And again, talking to a lot of friends, that has come crystally clear to me this week. I've also learned why the use of blackface is so offensive. And yes, I knew it in the past, but reality has really set in.
But Governor, it's hard for people listening to you, an educated man at the age of 59, to say that you're just learning about the history of it. You didn't know the history, know that it was offensive before?
Well, I think we're all on a learning curve, and certainly, Ms. King, I am not the same person now at age 59 that I was back in my early 20s.
But your early 20s was 1984, not 1964.
That's right, yes.
So you would think in 1984 that this was certainly a problem back then?
I don't think there's any question that there are today, and there were then, when I was in my early 20s, racial insensitivities. I think there's still unconscious attitudes that, yes, we are aware of these things, but we don't realize sometimes, especially as a white person, how impactful, how offensive they are. And again, I've still got a lot to learn, but this has been a week that has been very eye-opening for me.
Mm-hmm. Did you have black friends growing up?
I did. I grew up on the Eastern Shore in a very rural area. When I was in the 5th grade, schools were desegregated. So from the 6th grade through the 12th grade, I was in integrated schools. And yes, so I grew up in that environment.
See, that's which makes it even harder for us to understand. You had black friends or grew up with black people. So it would seem that you would be more sensitive and more aware of that.
I don't have any excuses for what I did in my early life, but I can just tell you that I have learned. I have a lot more to learn. I'm a better person, and here as I sit as a 59-year-old man governing the Commonwealth of Virginia, this is really an opportunity, I believe, to make awareness of this issue, to really have a frank dialogue and discussion about race and equity in this country.
Let's go back to the picture, and I know you've addressed it, but it still raises so many questions for people.
Absolutely.
Why do you think it came out now?
I don't know, but this is really the first time I have ever seen that picture.
How could that be? It's on your yearbook page, Governor.
Well, I was shocked to see it, and I really believe the fact that if you look at the unpreparedness of me, to react to this, both on Friday night and Saturday, that really confirms that this is the first time.
Well, let me ask you this. Are those your pants? Those pants are very distinct. Do you have a pair of pants that look like that?
I have never had any pants like that.
You first said that it was, well, first you said you wouldn't say which one was you. That was the first thing. And then you said, then you came and apologized for being in the picture. Why would you apologize for something that horrific if you're not 100% sure that it's you?
Well, I definitely overreacted. And again...
but why'd you do that?
Well, when you're in a state of shock like I was, we don't always think as clearly as we should. I will tell you that later that night, I had a chance to step back, take a deep breath, look at the picture, and said, this is not me in the picture. And I also had a number of friends and classmates from medical school that called and said, Ralph, that is not you. And that was comforting as well.
But Governor, that's a hell of an overreaction for something that is so sensitive and so offensive and so explosive, to take responsibility without really knowing for 100% that that's me.
Yes. Again, when I stepped back and looked at it, I just said, I know it's not me in the Klan outfit, and I started looking in the picture of the individual with blackface, and I said, that's not me either. And that's why I felt so strongly about going in front of the camera on Saturday and clarifying this.
But instead of clarifying at a press conference 9 days ago, he raised more questions, admitting to wearing shoe polish to darken his face, impersonating Michael Jackson for a dance competition.
That's right.
Are you still able to moonwalk?
Inappropriate circumstances.
My wife says inappropriate circumstances.
For many of us watching, it looked like you were about to actually demonstrate the moonwalk. Were you thinking about showing off your moonwalking skills?
No, because I don't have those at age 59. But I will tell you, Gail, I regret that. This is a serious moment.
It's very serious.
And whether it was a nervous laugh or whatever, it was inappropriate.
So you weren't thinking about doing it when you looked over at the floor? You were not thinking about doing a moonwalk?
No.
Many people credit Pam, your lovely wife, for stepping in at that point.
Let me just
Another
tell you,
reason to be nicer on Valentine's Day for you, sir.
Gail, let me just tell you that, as we say, I'm married way up, and I would not be sitting here having this conversation if it wasn't for my wife of 33 years.
What do you say to people that are looking at this story, if you do stay in office, which you say you are, someone that commits a racist offense and says, well, the governor did it, and he's okay?
Yeah.
Do you think it sends a message that this isn't being taken seriously if you stay in office, when so many people at the highest levels want you to step down? You
know, I'm not here to make any excuses, but I will tell you that the man that you're looking at right now at age 59, who has given over 35 years of service to the United States Army. I have taken care of thousands of sick children and have had over 12 years of public service to the Commonwealth of Virginia. The man you're looking at and talking to right now is not who I was in my early 20s. I have learned, I admit to my mistakes, and I'm going to improve my life and do better and be in a position where I can help other people. That's why I do what I do, Gail. Every morning I get up. If I feel like I'm helping people, then that makes me content.
Gail King there with Virginia Governor Ralph Northam in a conversation they had Sunday morning that has dominated the conversation on this Monday here in Richmond. You know, we talked about this earlier, and it bears repeating that in a Washington Post poll published over the weekend, the Commonwealth was divided 47% to 47% about whether Governor Northam should stay or go. But the factoid that really did seem to stick out to people is this: 58% of African-American respondents to the survey said that Governor Northam should not resign. He's gained support from black leaders across the state and even some from across the country. And one of them is the founder and president of the National Black Farmers Association, John Boyd Jr., who joins us here in Richmond tonight. Sir, thank you for being out here.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
You're one of the people that the governor actually consulted with in the days after these revelations,
yes,
as he was trying to hold on to his power and regain trust. When you met with him, what was he like?
Well, he was, you can see that he had had a very hard week. And we had a very candid conversation about blackface, about race, redemption, forgiveness. And the first session of the meeting, we actually prayed. I prayed for the governor. I prayed for his family. I prayed for Virginia. I prayed for unity, because as everyone can see now, Virginia is in an uproar over what's been happening over the incidents over the past a few weeks. So I would say you can see that there was a sense of strain in the governor's face, but he asked for forgiveness. And I was raised of a person, my grandfather's name was Thomas Board, and he didn't believe in telephones. When telephones first came out, he said, I don't believe in phones because I can't see the man's eyes that I'm looking at. And my grandfather said, if you want to know anything about a man's character, you look him in the eye. And I looked him in the eye when he asked for forgiveness, and I believe that he was sincere with his apology. And that was part of the reason why I chose to come out for him. So,
and
yes.
You were on the steps of the Capitol today with other African-American leaders,
right.
Some that run civic organizations like yours, others who are Christian ministers, all essentially conveying the same thing, that the governor deserves another chance.
Well, I do believe he's a decent human being. He doesn't always have the correct choice of words, but I do believe that he's a decent human being, and he wants to try to get it right. And I think that that's important, and he has a few years left to really reach out to other African-American leaders and see how he can put some of those policies in place to improve the lives of African-Americans and the whole state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia.
You feel that way. Of course, there are others who feel differently.
Absolutely.
One of them is Democratic Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton, who represents a swing district in Northern Virginia. She spoke on Sunday with Margaret Brennan at Face the Nation and said that the governor has to go. Take a listen.
Okay.
The contrition you heard there, is that enough for you to say he does not need to resign?
It does not change my opinion that he needs to resign.
Why?
Because I don't believe he can effectively lead the Commonwealth at this time. I mean, I understand that he's feeling contrition, that he's feeling regret, but we need somebody who can not only address the wrongs of the past, but take Virginia into the future. And I think he's lost the confidence of the people in order to be able to do that.
So, Congresswoman feels that way.
Yes.
Virtually the entire state congressional delegation feels
right.
that way. If they were to pick up the phone and say to you, why on earth are you willing to give him a second chance, what would you tell them?
Well, I'm a voter. I'm a registered voter here in Virginia, and I'm not running for any kind of office or anything like that. I made my decision based on my constituents that I represent, and in this case, African-American farmers, which his administration reached out and said that he wanted to work with us. And I use this example because it's very important for the people that's watching this show. I've been begging and pleading with the Trump administration for a meeting to sit down and say, how come African-American farmers can't get their checks from the federal government? All those requests fell upon deaf ears. I reached out to the Agriculture Secretary, begging and pleading for a meeting to tell them how bad my members are hurting. Those meetings fell upon deaf ears.
But the governor was with you.
The governor said, how can I help your people? Before blackface came out, how can I help African-American farmers in the state of Virginia? After he watched me on one of the 24-hour cable shows. So I have a governor who's sincere about helping, and I have a Trump administration who's telling us to go to hell in a handbasket.
Right.
So I made the choice based upon how we would be treated. And people say, well, would you meet with President Trump? I would meet with him today and ask him how come we can't get help from the federal government and that my people need help. So that's part of the reason why I came out for this governor. And I understand Jennifer's position. I understand the political position that they're coming from. But Democrats are going to have to get on the same page and begin to work together. This governor has reached out to them. And I believe that other leaders should sit down with this governor, and also elected officials need to get together on one accord, else I believe that you'll see a whole sweeping change here in Virginia in the political paradigm. Yes.
Well, John Boyd Jr. is the founder and president of the National Black Farmers Association. You're kind to be out here in the cold with us tonight to talk a little bit about the governor and the situation here.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing
that.
Thank
you for having me.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Capitol Square in Richmond, Virginia. I'm Ed O'Keefe of CBS News. I've been here for about 10 days with a big crew of us have been covering this scandal, these trio of scandals that have rocked Virginia state government and drawn the attention of the nation and the world. And if we've been reminded of anything over the last few days, it's that this Commonwealth has a troubled and complex history when it comes to racial injustice. This is the 400th anniversary of a few things in Virginia. First off, the founding of the House of Burgesses, which is the oldest legislative body in the United States. Also the 400th anniversary of the arrival of slaves at Jamestown. And it's an anniversary that the Commonwealth is preparing to commemorate later this year. And there's been a lot of concern that with what's happened in the last week or so, how could the state potentially prepare for that? We wanted to talk about some of this with Ravi Perry, who's the chair of the Political Science Department at Virginia Commonwealth University here in Richmond. He joins me now. Thank you so much for being out here in the cold with us.
Oh, I'm glad to be here.
As I said to you before we started, I'm sure you've had a heck of a week talking about this with students, because it's kind of living and breathing political history.
As you might imagine, students are definitely glued to the television and to the news wires, really interested to see what's going to happen with this saga here.
We talk about the 400th anniversary of a few things that are happening this year. You look at that history and you set this against it. Sort of talk about that and what all of this might mean for Virginia as it works through this year.
Well, it's Black History Month, and this is also the Commonwealth, the state that is the first state to really codify racism into its laws, even before it was a state in the Union. And if this is the context in which we are having to celebrate Black History Month now, in the midst of our state executive leaders having these racist allegations against them, 3 of them, this suggests that we have not exactly moved far beyond from the 400 years in which my ancestors were brought here unwillingly.
I get a sense from talking to people who live in the state, who live near the state, know people who live in the state, know the state's changing politics, that they're kind of shocked by this, because they thought that this was a state that was becoming increasingly democratic, far more liberal in its politics and in its beliefs and its practice of social issues. And then this happens. And if anything, it reminds everybody that this is a state that, until recently, this kind of behavior obviously was quite common.
Absolutely. This is a purple state in more ways than just political ways. As it relates to race relations, we have, on the one hand, you know, a very significant problem, obviously, right, with our state executive leaders. Well, across the street here in Richmond, we have a young, dynamic, Black African-American mayor who is doing dynamic, unique things here, and that's putting Richmond on the map. And so it's really paradoxical. On one side of the city, we have miles of Confederate statues that's honoring the quote-unquote heroism of people who killed my ancestors. And then on the other side of this Capitol, we have an old Negro burial ground that has still yet to receive the national recognition that it deserves. This is definitely a paradoxical state as it relates to both our ideology and how we vote in our elections.
Real quick, generationally, you saw the poll over the weekend. It suggests about half the state is okay with the governor staying on. 58% of African Americans in the Washington Post poll said the governor should stay on. But one of our earlier guests suggested that there might be some generational differences, especially among African Americans and other minorities, as to whether or not he deserves another shot.
Certainly that's the case. All of the folks I've been talking to around the state this entire week have definitely had a generational split. Those 50 and older, white and Black, have tended to say, hey, give these guys a chance. They let them apologize and let's move on. All millennial voters I've come across, particularly Black women, and that's really the group that's going to be probably most affected by both of these kinds of scandals. Right. Both sexual assault allegations against our lieutenant governor and, of course, the racist allegations against 3 of our top state elected officials. And Black women is absolutely an important voter bloc for the Democratic Party to win here statewide. And without their enthusiastic turnout, Democrats in Virginia don't have a chance.
Ravi Perry is the chair of the Political Science Department at Virginia Commonwealth University here in Richmond. Thank you for taking some time. We'll talk again, because you've got some interesting elections coming up this year, and going into next year, of course, this will be a swing state. So thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon. We've, of course, seen parts of the interview that Gayle King did with Governor Ralph Northam on Sunday here in Richmond. Earlier today, she spoke with Anne Marie Green and Vlad Dudier about the interview, reflected a little bit on their conversation. Take a listen.
Here's the question, I guess, that we have, and we've been talking about it all morning long. Was it your sense that he was being sincere with you about some of the things that he was saying.
There was no question to me that he was being sincere, and he sincerely wants to get this right. You know, it does seem like every time he says something, it creates another problem. But there's no question about what he wants to do and why he believes he's the best person for this job. And I believe him when he says, I am not stepping down. He knows that he's made some big, big, big mistakes. And he also wants the chance to make it right. And, you know, when you talk to people in the state of Virginia, many people want to give him a chance to do that. You know, it's very tough. It's still, you know, there were a couple times in the interview where somebody says something, you have that dog hit, huh? Because it's still so hard to believe that that wasn't him in the picture or that he didn't know about the picture. But because I said, did you ever stand next to someone in a Klan robe and take a picture? So
because he wasn't a kid. He was
no, he wasn't a kid.
Doctor.
But he said he saw that picture and he just overreacted. But I said, but you reacted so quickly just to say no, to say, yes, it was me. I take full responsibility. Friends started calling him. He started thinking and he realized, nope, he still insists. This is what I said. I said, you know, it would be so easy to believe if you just said, hey, I was 25. You know, I know it was a dumb, stupid thing to do. I'm so sorry. I'm a different person. So, yes, I took the picture and I so regret it. But he goes, but that's just not the truth. I did not feel that he was being disingenuous.
Well, I think the thing for a lot of people is, you know, the picture's one thing, but then the way that he's been dealing with it, he's just been sort of, excuse my French, but stepping in it over and over and over again. It's all these missteps. And then there's this interview with you where he calls slaves indentured servants.
Okay, but did you hear the explanation for that?
Well, I understand that he released a statement that said he's still learning. I think that for a lot of people would be like, at this point, you're still learning.
But he was at a speaking engagement, and a historian came up to him and said that it's more factually accurate to say, for this time period that he was referring to you, even though in the past he's used the word enslaved, the historian came up to him and said, you know, factually, it's better to say indentured. So that's where he got that from. But the bottom line is he knows that it's slavery. He's not trying to step away from that.
Right.
He was just trying to be historically accurate. And then that ends up turning into a whole nother round of criticism for him. That's the thing. You know, I think he so wants to do the right thing. And so an historian says, you know, historically, you're not being accurate. You might want to change it, which is what he did. But now he's calling for an investigation himself. He wants to know where the pictures came from.
He should.
He wants to know how they got on his yearbook page. I said, do you know who those two people are? He goes, nope, he doesn't know who the two people are. So, you know, I think that I saw an interesting article over the weekend, I think it was in USA Today, where the reporter said, who among us hasn't done something in our 20s that we are not ashamed of or that we regret? Who of us hasn't, you know, while we're all, you know, we live in a culture where you do something, we find that you screwed up and it's like off with your head. And I think sometimes you have to put everything in context of the time. And I'm hearing more and more about, you know, people who did blackface because they admired Diana Ross or they admired a rapper or they admired somebody famous. Thinking, you know, it's a compliment. I don't mean it as an insult.
No, there is a nuanced discussion around, you know, blackface as Michael Jackson and blackface as a minstrel, like as an Al Jolson.
As Al Jolson, a mammy. No, that ain't good. That ain't good.
There's a distinction there for people who really want to get into the subtle distinctions of it. But the other thing that I found really sort of interesting, and he didn't really seem to play that up a lot in the interview, but the New York Times reported that, you know, when integration came to the state of Virginia, you know, his parents, like a lot of white parents, had the choice to send him to an integrated school, or like some people made the decision to send their kids to white private schools.
And he didn't go to the white private school.
He and his brother went to that integrated school. I showed Emery the picture.
He's one of two white guys on the
basketball team. The picture's really kind of funny, because it's like, you know, these African American basketball players and him holding the ball, you know. But he didn't talk about that. But they did interview African American friends of his that he's had over the years. Yeah, but he didn't play that up.
Yeah, why didn't he play that up?
Well, I did ask him when because I said, "Did you have black friends growing up?" I didn't know that backstory until I saw the article. He goes, "Yes, I went to this integrated school," which makes it all the more astounding that you weren't more sensitive to it.
Yeah.
So I know, it is a very interesting conversation with him, but I don't doubt his sincerity, and he's in anguish about the problems that he's caused for the state of Virginia, which he cares deeply about.
It'll be just interesting because he has to lead that state, and he may feel all those things. The question is, can he still be effective as the
Well, if Virginians still want him, it's their decision and their choice. And I will say that this has certainly sort of encouraged this conversation that we need to be having. And I think you're right, Gail, that we are living in a time where there's sort of instant retribution, and then we sort of ask questions later, the fallout, did we do the right thing? And maybe it's time to sort of move to the next step where we
take a breath, everybody.
Right, sort of look at circumstances, you know, one circumstance at a time, and then come to a conclusion.
I mean, and you look at his situation and you look at what's happening with Justin Fairfax, two totally different cases.
Right.
One's against the law.
Yes, I was going to say one is a crime.
Yeah.
Yes. One is an alleged crime. Yeah. But we'll see how that plays out as well.
Yeah.
Our thanks to Gail King, Anne-Marie Green, and Vladimir Dudier, who, of course, you can watch every morning here on CBSN. This is State of Crisis. Scandal in Virginia.